Hi there, folks. My name is Dara Star Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. Thank you so much for joining me here on KJLH Radio. I'm so glad to be with you once again to talk about the issues that matter. You can find me online on Instagram at Dara Tucker B. Find me and let's talk about these topics even after the radio show is over. You can also find me on the KJLH Instagram page at Radio Free KJLH. You can find out about current events that are going on in the city of Los Angeles and beyond. You can learn more about the DJs and the hosts that you listen to every week. Join the KJLH Instagram page at Radio Free KJLH on Instagram if you have not done that already. And then you can stop by and see me at Dara Tucker B. I'm so glad to be bringing a different type of show to you this week. I've been cajoled and encouraged, I will say, by my producer, whose name is Van Everett, who is joining me today. He's been on me for a few weeks to do a different type of show for you. We're going to do a show called an AMA. That's what they call it online, but here we'll call it Ask Me Anything. Full disclosure, I have been in the DR this week. I've been in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, watching a friend of mine get married. It was a beautiful experience, beautiful island. But I have been just a little bit unplugged from the political process this week. And it's good to do that from time to time. And so I have taken some time to put out an all call on my socials, which Van Everett has encouraged me to do. Van, would you say hi to the people first of all, before I get going too much here?
Hi, people. Glad to meet you. Glad that you all sent your questions in for Dara. This promises to be a great episode.
Yeah. Van is also helping me with getting these episodes up online. So you can see video versions of these episodes on the day after they air. So they air on Sunday nights at 7, but then on Mondays, you can see these on my YouTube, which is youtube.com/Dara Star Tucker. And I'm Dara Star Tucker everywhere else. That's Dara with one R and Star with two, as you all know. So I'm also on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all of the places. So if you ever want to watch these episodes, and many of them are extended episodes, you can always watch them on my podcast on my YouTube. But Van has encouraged me to do an Ask Me Anything, an AMA episode this week, where viewers and listeners sent in questions about all kinds of stuff. I told them nothing really is off limits. You can ask me about who I am, my life, my history. We can talk about education, entertainment, culture, politics, all kinds of questions. There's really a grab bag. And I have left it up to Van to make the selections as to what we are going to be talking about today. I vaguely looked over some of these questions. Some of them seemed a bit interesting. Some of them seemed a bit interesting in a different sort of way. So I'm going to leave it up to Dan to filter through and make sure that we have some good, interesting questions of the very good kind and hopefully the stimulating kind this week. So Van, I hope you've got some good stuff for me. There were several listeners that chimed in and had really some interesting stuff that they wanted to know about. And I am totally, absolutely not prepared. Nothing is prepackaged or planned about this at all. We're just going to get right into it. And we're going to start taking your viewer and listener questions right now. So Van, without any further ado, first of all, Van, we are going to have further ado. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, please? Because Van is playing now a pivotal role in helping to put this show together. So Van, please introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay. All right. I am Van Everett. I am the producer, editor, a lot of editing that goes into this process for Dara's radio show and her podcast. Aside from that, I also host a podcast myself called The Scenario. It was actually a radio show before it was a podcast as well. So my background is in radio more than it is even in podcasting. And I've been doing that show for it'll be 9 years when we start back in the fall. Yeah.
All right.
In the winter.
So The Scenario, go check out The Scenario podcast when you finish up with The Breakdown. All right, Van, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for encouraging me to do this AMA today. And now, without further ado, we are going to get on with today's show. Go ahead and fire away, Van.
All right. So this is apropos considering what you just talked about, being in the DR and all. Catsuit Studios asks, how do you avoid burnout? And they also want to know if you tried the passion fruit in the DR. They say that they're incredible.
Have I tried passion fruit in the DR? I have, first of all, little known fact about me. I have a lot of food sensitivities. I have something called oral allergy syndrome, which is an allergy syndrome that's related to tree pollen, but then it can transfer over to the fruit that comes from those trees. Normally with tropical fruit like that, I do okay, but I avoided all fruit and I have a lot of sensitivities to live foods, live vegetables. So I really did not want to end up in any kind of a precarious position. So I did not try any fresh fruits or vegetables in the DR because I didn't want anything that would react badly. So for me, it was just literally just protein, meat, bread.
Yeah.
Real exciting stuff there. So no, I did not try to passion fruit in the DR. But they asked a question about burnout. Goodness gracious.
How do you avoid it?
I don't think that I can say that I do well with avoiding that sense of burnout. Honestly, I'm someone who is very passionate and very driven about the things that I care about. And I tend to go. And so it was probably a 3-day break that I had this week. It was very much forced upon me. It was a very good friend that I definitely wanted to be there for. But to do that in the middle of a political season like this, when I have so many demands that are being put on me, you all know I have said before that I work with a lot of C3s and C4s and political action groups that I do video messaging for. And so this is the busiest part of that season, of course, with us being just about a month out from the election. So that was hard. It was hard to step back from that. But I can say honestly that I'm looking forward to the political season being over with. It's been wonderful. It's been educational for me. And I am always interested in politics. And I definitely will be talking about politics from time to time going forward. But I started out what I'm doing, talking about culture and education and art and entertainment and all kinds of things. I like to vary it up. I like to switch it up. So the work itself for me, outside of the political season, the work itself for me is invigorating. I really enjoy what I do. And if I feel like, at the actual editing process, because I do these little mini documentaries, really is what they are, little breakdowns on social media. So if the intensity of that editing gets to be too much for me, then I'll go watch, y'all, I'm the corniest TV viewer that there is. I'll go watch a Little House on the Prairie. I will watch The Waltons. I'll watch Frasier, Modern Family, The Dick Van Dyke Show, Twilight Zone, classic Star Trek, or Turner Classic Movies, just some classic film. That to me is that is so rejuvenating to just lay down in my bed and watch something that just feels just some old, nostalgic, simple something. That's a very easy way to rejuvenate. But I love Broadway plays, in terms of things that I actually like to get out and do. I have committed myself to doing some hiking in the future now that it's a little bit cooler.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, there are all kinds of things I love to do. Going to concerts, getting ready to go see Stevie Wonder here with his little surprise tour that he just announced. And yeah, I love coming away from it all and just enjoying the entertainment that I love, enjoying a good film, really.
I gotta ask, the nostalgic film and television thing that you've got there, because it's one thing to be nostalgic for an era in which you actually lived. It's another thing to have so much nostalgia for stuff that was around for the most part before you were even born. How did that happen? Where did that come from?
That's the funny part is like most people my age, it's just all about the 90s, all of the television and the music that they love. It's just all about 90s R&B and 90s TV. And that stuff is cool, but like I'm not the one who's going to probably sit around and watch Martin or a show like that. I was watching those classic shows when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And for some reason, I was just naturally drawn to them. I was sneaking because I've talked before about how I grew up Pentecostal holiness and we couldn't listen to secular music, but I would get my little radio and put it under my pillow and listen to Tommy Dorsey and Benny Goodman and Count Basie, and Nat King Cole and stuff. That's the stuff I was sneaking and listening to. In addition to the music of my day. I mean, I loved Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson and, Prince and all of them, George Michael. But the music that is really closest to my heart, the music that was in my headphones on the plane when I was taking off and landing and trying to calm myself because I'm not a good flyer. But the music that was in my ears was Nat King Cole this week. And yeah, that's always been my thing. The Dick Van Dyke Show is my favorite show of all time. And there's just something about the simplicity and I don't know, there's just a quality there that I feel can sometimes be lost in our current entertainment. But there's plenty of like television shows. Like I said, Frasier is one of my favorite shows of all time. I think it's one of the greatest shows ever created. So there's contemporary stuff that I love too.
Yeah. Frasier's 30 years old now. So if you want to call that contemporary show.
You know what, man?
Moving right along. CRW.
Yes, look, Abbott Elementary is a wonderful show. I do like Abbott Elementary.
I like to the test. It's great. You like what you like. Nothing's wrong with what you like.
I love Succession on HBO. That's been one of my favorite. I would say top 10 shows of all time is Succession on HBO. If you have not seen it, I would highly recommend that. And there are several shows of this current time that I like. I think The Gilded Age is the name of the other show that I love on HBO. But yeah, not to disparage today's entertainment, but I cannot get from those shows what I get from the Dick Van Dyke Show. No way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's whatever gets you there is what matters. And that's great.
Yeah.
So let's go to some more questions. In Dar's DM, CRW04232 asks, how do we long-term combat this misinformation and propaganda and restore a more honest politics?
That is a really big question, and it is a very big passion of mine, combating misinformation. And a lot of people don't necessarily understand how to distinguish between misinformation and disinformation. And a lot of people don't know what either one of them are when they hear them. So misinformation is just, you got a hold of some bad information. You didn't realize that it wasn't good information, and you just spread it like a counterfeit bill or something. Disinformation would be the person who is creating the counterfeit bill. They're putting something out into circulation that they know is not true. So misinformation can be spread by well-meaning people. Disinformation is something like we heard about the scandal a couple of weeks ago that Russia had created a shell corporation here in the United States and was paying conservative commentators to spread specific information that they wanted spread just to cause chaos and confusion in American elections. That is a disinformation campaign. And I think it's probably going to be some combination of legislation. And I think a lot of the stuff ends up being spread through social media because that's just the way that a lot of us communicate these days. And so I think legislatively, we are going to have to begin to hold some of these social media companies responsible for what they allow on their platforms. Because as of now, there are very few regulations, if any. There are very few regulations on these social media companies. And if you've ever had a problem where you've had to contact TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, you can't get through to anybody. They're not even attempting to have any sort of relationship with their customers. And so I think really it's going to take Congress to begin to take some of this stuff seriously. And until they do start to address this at the root, then this will continue to be a major problem. But, I've put out videos about how individuals can spot misinformation and disinformation. And it has a lot to do with, first of all, just stepping back, not being so quick to share something just because it gets your emotions riled up. They're conservatives and they would probably do this, or they would probably say this, so let me share it. Or these are liberals. Yeah, we know how they are. Let me share that. Stopping for just a moment to do a quick check and just determining whether or not it has a major news outlet talked about this. Has anyone outside of this fringe website or this YouTuber, have they shared this? Is it legitimate? Stopping for just a moment before you share, that can do a lot to stop misinformation from spreading. And then I always tell people, if you can, and this is another way to address your own confirmation biases, and confirmation bias really has to do with news that you are already predisposed to believe, your tendency to believe things that your brain is already telling you, this is my impression of this group of people. And so if you say something negative about them, I'm probably going to just take you at your word, and I'm not going to stop to fact check this. But one of the ways that we can more easily avoid falling prey to our own confirmation bias is to, if you are able, this is always it's a big caveat. If you're able, subscribe to one news outlet. Find one legitimate news outlet to subscribe to, because generally, if you have to pay to receive your news from somewhere, and every news outlet has bias. Not saying that you're not going to run into bias with the New York Times or the Miami Herald or the Boston Globe, the LA Times, whatever it is. But if it's behind a paywall, chances are that the people who are producing that news are being paid. They're actually making a living. They probably went to school to learn journalism, to learn how to properly study and research before they put that out there. There is an ombudsman, someone who's there to make sure that there's veracity there to the news that they're putting out. And what I always say is, if they get it wrong, okay, because every news outlet is going to get it wrong from time to time. But if they get it wrong, what happens? Ask yourself, if a news outlet gets it wrong, what happens? Do they post a retraction? Do they come back and say, we apologize, we misspoke, or we had a guest on that said something that was not true? Do they fact check themselves? Really start to ask yourself whether or not the news outlets that you pay attention to really care about getting it right. And then pay attention to organizations like the Peabody Organization and the Pulitzer Organization. Are these news outlets, whether it's television or print or whatever, online organizations, are they winning any sort of awards for reporting?
Yeah.
Are people who give out awards for journalistic excellence, have they acknowledged this news outlet? And if they never have, and if it's a major news outlet, that's a problem. And don't just assume that those organizations that acknowledge journalistic excellence, don't just assume that they're slanted just because they haven't given your favorite outlet an award, because there may be a reason that your favorite outlet is not being acknowledged by these organizations whose job it is to reward journalistic excellence. And I would say as a rule, also in general, the final thing I'll say about that is make sure that you're reading your news, or make sure that you're reading more news than you're watching. 24-hour news, cable news, I would say, is there for a very specific purpose. I mean, watching clips here and there, we all do that. Watching live events like the debate, things like that. It's always helpful to have televised news. But those 24-hour news channels, all of them, some of them do a much better job than others. I'm not equating them by any means. But they exist for the purpose of entertainment primarily. I mean, they have, everybody's got to stay afloat. Everybody's got sponsors. But their job is to keep eyeballs on that television screen. And so you're going to be missing a lot if you are primarily getting your news by watching it. So I would say read more news than what you're watching. Vox is an outlet that I really love. It's an independent news outlet. VOX. ProPublica is an organization that does a lot of in-depth reporting. They report on the news. They evaluate news and determine whether or not these people are living up to the standards they're supposed to be living up to. And so there's all kinds of fact-checking sites. If you all want me to do a video on just how to spot good news outlets and what they are, I would love to do a video on that. So just reach out on my socials and let me know if that's something you want me to really go into in depth into.
That would be a great idea.
Yeah,
I think. Shaw Loves 6 wants to know, how do you put together your topic videos? Like, are there a lot of takes and rehearsals?
Yeah, it's a messy process. It is a very messy process behind the scenes that I would hope that no one would ever have to witness me recording some of these videos. There's stopping and starting. I mean, for anyone who would want to do online content, just rest assured that for a lot of us who do this, to do this kind of thing in front of the camera, we're messing up all the time. And every single edit that you see is probably me having to stop and start for some reason. And then it's also helpful when I get to put like B-roll on top of my footage also, because that covers a multitude. So yeah, I'm stopping and starting constantly. I use a program. I use a DSLR camera. I have a Sony A7 IV that I typically film on. and I use a program called Adobe Premiere Pro to edit. And so it's a pro editing software. It was just really important for me to teach myself that program because I always aspired to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be an actress and filmmaker when I was a kid. And so I thought, I didn't take that path. And so for me, putting together the breakdown, putting together these episodes, for me is just a way of expressing my creativity and doing a short form version of like documentary filmmaking. So I get a big thrill out of it. It really is it's extra for the TikTok platform. And most people are just picking up their phones and doing what they do. You certainly don't necessarily get more views for using more expensive equipment or editing software, but it's my own standard and it's something that I actually enjoy.
Yeah. I also think that it's part of what people identify you with. It is what draws people to what it is you do. Yeah. I think this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. I think it's a standard that I like to uphold if possible, just a standard of quality.
Yeah. I'm not sure how this person is to pronounce this name. This is part of being in the modern era, is that since people often aren't using their real names, they're using acronyms sometimes, maybe. Alec Place asks, how long did it take for you to reform your religious views to shape what felt good in your heart? He says, I recall you mentioning going to college being challenging to your views you'd grown up with. I may be misremembering.
Yeah, that's a big topic. He said, how long did it take for me to reform
your religious views to a shape that felt good in your heart, to, I guess, arrive into a place where you felt like they aligned with what was truly within you?
Yeah, I've gone through a process, and I've said before, they call it religious deconstruction these days at least on TikTok. There's a whole community around the idea of religious deconstruction, and that has really risen up since the pandemic. A lot of people started to break away from traditional Christianity and started to question a lot of the conventions that they grew up with. When I was going through that process, really, I would say from about 2009 to 2011 was really that intense period for me. So it was probably a good 3-year process of just allowing myself to really break free from a lot of that. It's almost like experiencing a spiritual amputation that you are putting yourself through. But if they didn't have a name, my grandmother would have called it just being rebellious. You just rebellious, you backsliding. But it really didn't have anything to do with wanting to, quote unquote, sin, just live some debaucherous life or something. Or as the Bible calls it, riotous living. I wasn't trying to get out there and drink and smoke and party and all the stuff that they told us was so horrible growing up in the Holiness Church. It really wasn't about that. I was always a questioner as a child. And I remember really being challenged with the way that the church treated the LGBTQ community. I remember that being a real splinter issue for me, and listening to the way that a lot of preachers in particular regarded them. Because my grandmother, who was the holiness pastor, she was actually very loving. She preached holiness, and she knew how to preach about some hellfire and stuff. But she would do that still with the spirit of love. I know that may sound confusing to some people or contradictory to some people, but there was always a spirit of love behind what she said. And my parents, they took in a couple of gay men that were a part of her homeless ministry. My grandmother had a homeless ministry. They took those gay men in, and they put them in our home, and they housed them because they had been kicked out by their family. And rejected by their families. And my grandmother would take in people who were from the LGBTQ community when their families would kick them out. And she would minister to all of their needs, their spiritual needs, and she'd feed them, take care of them. And so that's the tradition that I grew up in. And when my father broke away and became a part of what's now known as the non-denominational or evangelical type church, we were around some different types of folks that really did not carry love as that sort of leading ethic that guided their faith. And we noticed a difference. There was a difference in the way that a lot of those folks conducted themselves. And now that we're seeing so much of this, what I would call Christian nationalism, that has really started to permeate this country that has really taken the place of anything that would be called true Christianity. A lot of folks' religion is their country is their religion, and so for some of them, their bigotry is their religion. So I started to notice a lot of this stuff when I was a child. I started to notice, man, it's the way their Christian faith is expressed can vary wildly depending on what environment you're in. We moved from church to church all over the United States. And so a lot of it, I think I began to see the artifice of it. I began to see the construct of it. Okay, you all do this, and you all say, if you don't speak in tongues, then you're not going to heaven. And over here for y'all, if you're not wearing skirts, if the women are wearing pants, then they're in trouble with God. And a lot of it honestly started to seem just a little bit as like a man-made creation, a lot of that part of it. So I do my best, honestly, to stay connected with the part of my faith that actually does speak to me and that is meaningful to me. And anything Jesus said, any of those words in red really go back to love. They go back to loving people. And it would really be hard to square up a lot of this Christian nationalist stuff with those words in red. It would be very hard to square up a lot of what is being called Christianity right now with what Jesus said. It's just become so far removed. And, the music still means a whole lot to me. You all know that I'm a singer and I'm a performer, and you'll see me sometimes put hymns out, on my socials, and I'll just sit down and play the piano a little bit and try to reconnect with the part of it that does still connect with me, that, I have to fight for that part. And I think it's worth fighting for.
That's good. That's interesting. You've shared just recently when you and Horace Gold had your conversation.
Yeah.
And you shared quite a bit about the similarities in your upbringing. I thought it was really interesting. A lot of the things that the both of you had to say about how that has impacted you. And I guess the process that apparently it takes to shed those things that you found to be negative, and at the same time figure out ways to embrace the positive things. So did that feel like more of a process, a long-term process for you, or did it feel like once you had made a decision that you were there?
I mean, I think I was always, quote unquote, deconstructing. And it's also a reminder to go back. If you did not hear last week's episode with Horace Gold, fascinating guy, and a really interesting conversation that we had about some of what I'm talking about now, because he went through his own process with all of this. You can find that on the KJLH website, or you can find that on my YouTube, youtube.com/Dara Tucker, that full conversation with Horace Gold. But if you're interested in these questions around religious deconstruction, and that conversation was specifically about him maintaining a relationship with his MAGA parents, which is something I really didn't deal with a lot of the political side of that. My parents were not overtly political in that way, and they're no longer with us. But yeah, that process for me, it took a long time. And I look back on it now, and I was 10, 11 years old and asking questions and wondering why people grew up in these very charismatic Pentecostal type environments where everyone was so expressive, and it was all about the move of the Spirit here and there. And I was always evaluating, was this lady falling out because the pastor laid hands on her in a particular way and he expected her to fall out and she didn't want to embarrass him? And that was where my mind always was. It was like very rarely was I really feeling that I was a part of that environment. I felt like I was always an observer, this fly on the wall that was witnessing something. And I kept thinking, maybe someday this will make sense to me. Maybe I'll feel it. And I went through my periods as a teenager, really, where I would go up and get hands laid on me. And I'm like, I wanted that. I wanted to experience that because those were my people. And I was expected to grow up into what I saw around me. And so I think people started to look at me as very rebellious in that way, because I wouldn't do things like fall out because everybody else was falling out. And somebody would lay hands on me and I'd turn around and come back to my seat, and I would see people glaring at me, just sneering, shaking their heads. Oh, you're just, you're resisting the move of God, and I would be looked at like I was carnal. And I always got the feeling I was ruining everybody's fun, ruining the party, because I wasn't willing to go along with it. But after a point, I started to accept that was not necessarily the way that I was going to evolve. I had to accept that about myself. And it really helped to remove myself from that environment. I moved to Switzerland and then I moved to Detroit and didn't really go back permanently to live in Tulsa, which is where I'm from. So it was a deliberate process, but it was over a very long period of time. But like I said, that 2009 to 2011 period was a period of real intense questioning. And I went through that in between phase where I was reading A Course in Miracles and trying to learn about all these kind of different forms of spirituality. And I would read books on Hinduism and Buddhism. I just wanted to know about world religions and where we stood in all of that. I wanted to know about our history as Christians. And I think a lot of people they're discouraged from going on that journey because people will assume that they'll just lose their faith. And maybe I'm an example of someone who did that, who did move away from their faith. So maybe I'm certain people's worst nightmare in that way. So you did it and now you're not in church anymore. But I think you have to be true. It just sounds like such a cliche, but I think you really have to be true to yourself in that respect. And I feel like coming away from all of that, coming away from the pressure of just hell is its own conversation. I won't even try to get into the pressure of that and the fear of that and the weight of that in a Pentecostal holiness organization or background. That is intense. But pulling myself out of that environment, allowing myself to ask some of these real questions about what I actually believed and what I did not believe, it saved my life. It saved my life and it allowed me to live a more authentic existence. And it also allowed me not being around a bunch of folks who were putting that kind of pressure on me once I was able to move away after college, because I went to a small liberal arts Christian college there in Tulsa, didn't want to. But being able to pull away also allowed me to maintain that pure part of my faith that still means so much to me. I don't know that I would say that I am, the word that they would use a lot in our circles was a believer. Are you a believer? They didn't really put a whole lot of stock in, are you religious? Are you a Christian? No, are you a believer? So I cannot legitimately answer that and say, yes, I'm a believer. I believe that the Bible is a historical text. It's not a text of science. I think we have to be able to put these texts in their place, but I am a person of faith. And I think it's okay to say, I may not be a true believer in all aspects of this, but I am a person of faith. And I have been allowed to maintain that faith in a way that feels pure.
Yeah. All right, we're going to switch it up. Cooking and Weeping is this person's name who went to your DMs, and they asked, why are so many black men voting Trump? They also finished the question by saying, also these black male politicians tip-tap coonery. I don't know what the last part of that exactly is supposed to mean, but the first part, why are so many black men?
You tell me you don't know what you tell me you don't know what that means.
Individually, I understand what some of the words mean, but I'm not sure if I know the entire sentiment of what was. I'm not even sure if it was a question. But
Okay.
yes, but the first part is, why are so many black men voting Trump? What are your thoughts?
I'm not a black man, and I try not to make presumptuous statements about groups that I don't belong to, but I've actually had multiple conversations. And if you've been listening to The Breakdown or watching the All Over the Place podcast regularly, then you know that this is a question that I have been posing to several of my guests. Joshua Doss being a recent guest that I actually had this conversation with, and I've appreciated, and I have several black men in my life that I have these conversations with. My first perception about black men and Trump, why he tends to be more popular with them than the typical Republican politician, I think it's him as an individual. I don't think it's necessarily anything to do with his policies. I think he portrays a certain type of masculinity that can be uniquely appealing to a lot of black men, especially ones that came out of poverty and who aspire to achieve what Donald Trump has achieved. Donald Trump is his own best publicity agent. If he's good at anything, he's good at publicity. And I feel like that brashness of just, he loves other flashy people. the dude's been a part of the WWE. There's a part of him that is he just has that ringmaster personality. And so I think part of it is just a style thing. It's a form thing. It's a presentation thing. It's just say it how you mean it, put it out there, and don't really worry about how it comes out of your mouth, that kind of thing. I think that's something that men in particular, but Black men specifically, I think that they admire more so than women do. Just open your mouth and say what you got to say. Don't mince words. Don't speak like a politician. Just give it to us like you really mean it. And that's what he does. Yeah. And I think there are low information voters across all races and age groups and genders, whatever. There are low information voters. But I think also if you are a low information voter, you're probably more likely to be drawn to Donald Trump, because I think, if you can portray confidence and strength, then you are probably more likely to bring folks along with you and to convince people of your point of view than if you are right, but you are unsure of yourself and you're stumbling and you're quiet and you appear weak. Those things are typically not appealing to a lot of men. I think that may be a lot of why he appeals to men in general, I would say.
I can agree with that as a man myself and a Black man also. Yeah. that connects.
Did my answer pass muster with you then?
It works for me. It does have the official, as a representative for all Black men on this show.
For all Black men.
Yeah. It gets my stamp of approval.
Okay.
Okay. So Donna Valentine asks, how much vocal training have you had? She has a couple of questions. I'm going to ask you two of them. How much vocal training have you had? And do you have tips for not buying into the pessimism?
Yeah. My vocal training came from Linda Faye Tucker, and Doyle Tucker. Those are my parents. And so what I learned from them, from sitting on the front row in church and watching my mother sing my father's reworked version of Barbra Streisand's People. So he turned Barbra Streisand's People into a gospel song that my mother would sing in church. She sang the mess out of that song. And people would just weep. They would cry listening to her sing. And we just thought that was normal. This is what happens in church when you sing and everybody just, and little did we know that was her gift. So she was our first and greatest teacher. That's who I learned from. And so I never did any formal voice training at all.
Oh, wow.
I just jumped into doing what I'm doing. And so, yeah, that was my training. And my father was a pianist, music minister, and he was a preacher as well, but he was a prolific songwriter and piano player. And he sang, of course, put out several albums. So that was our family stock and trade. It was music and it was ministry. And so we really didn't have much of a choice but to do one or both of those things. And so I latched on to the music eventually, and songwriting as well. And then in terms of not falling prey to the pessimism, that's tough. I can't say that I have not fallen prey to pessimism, and it can depend on the day that you catch me. But I feel like a part of my job, part of my occupation and what I'm doing and putting out so much information and so much content around politics in this era right now, first of all, it's giving me something to do. Okay, so the first thing that I would encourage anyone who is dealing with pessimism and, oh my God, this thing is going to take over and what are we going to do and what if, is the first thing I would encourage you to do is just to do something. You can always canvas, you can phone bank, you can talk to your friends and neighbors, not argue them down, but you can have conversations with people that you trust and who trust you and that care about you. You can do postcard writing campaigns. You can always get connected with campaigns. And that includes campaigns of your local politicians, because a lot of them need help too. Your Congress people, they need help right now. And so the first thing I would encourage anyone who's dealing with pessimism, first thing I would encourage you to do is not necessarily go online and start sounding off about what you think about everything, because there's just a lot of static and a lot of noise out there. But I would encourage you to get active and to start making good use of your time and your energy, because that is the best antidote to discouragement and to pessimism. And so I remind myself of that all the time. I stay busy. My thing is research. My thing is history. Like, all right, JD Vance seems like a particularly menacing character to me. Let's figure out what is really going on with this guy. Where did his money come from? Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel put $15 million into JD Vance's senatorial campaign. JD Vance had never run for anything. And then less than 2 years later, he's being nominated as the vice president. Why? That's the stuff that gets me going. And that's the stuff that gets my mind firing off on all cylinders. And I can spend a couple of days just writing and researching about things like that. When I start really investigating the roots of certain things, that's what I do well. So figure out what it is that you do well and put your time and your energy into that. This race is very winnable. This is very doable. And it really is about voter mobilization. That's the only thing that we are fighting, because there have always been more of, I don't like the us versus them mentality. I don't even like thinking of myself as a Democrat, to be honest. I do not call myself a Democrat. I have progressive values, but I know which party supports those progressive values. But there have always been more people that have supported those progressive values than the people who are supporting conservative values. The only difference is turnout. Mm-hmm. They do not have to work nearly as hard as Democrats do at getting their base to turn out. And yeah, contact your local DNC office and tell them to put you to work, because there is always something to do. And it doesn't necessarily always involve money.
Yeah. That's great advice. Savage Auntie Writer asks, to what extent do you support reparations for native-born Black Americans? And can you describe how you believe it could work? There's a couple of more parts to the question, but let's just stop there because it's a mouthful by itself.
I have done a breakdown on whether or not American descendants of enslaved people should have reparations. And mainly the video was about delineating reparations that had been made for survivors of the Holocaust, reparations that had been made for survivors and the descendants of survivors of Japanese internment camps, and reparations that had been made for Native Americans because of the land that has been stolen from them. So it was basically a case-by-case rundown of, hey, this is where this has been done here in the United States. Why has this not been done for Black Americans who are descendants of enslaved people? So I absolutely 100% feel that there should be some reparations that should be made. How do I think that should happen? It is my personal feeling that should happen in the area of education, because for so long we were deprived of education. It was illegal for us to learn. And housing would be another area that I would say that reparations should be happening. Areas that help to fill that gap that exists, that we know still exists. Housing and education are two of the major areas where there are serious chasms between our community and the rest of the United States. Even people who come over as immigrants, they get certain grants and loans that are made available to them because people understand you're coming here with nothing. Let's help you get started. Let's help you get on your feet. Should that have been done for Black Americans who were promised 40 acres and a mule and never got it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's start with education and housing.
Yeah. Okay, I want to answer another part to this question. Savage Auntie Writer is really taking some time to think about some of this. Also, can you say what you believe would be the impact on the Black communities and white ones of such reparations?
I think it would take probably a couple of generations, at least a couple of generations, for us to see the impact of that. But I think we have to think long term when it comes to stuff like this, because other folks are thinking long term when it comes to their strategies. And so I don't think for you and I, Van, if reparations around education and housing were to be implemented now, I don't know that our generation would be the ones to necessarily benefit. Yeah. We'd be talking about your grandchildren and their children, and that's worth investing in. I'm someone I have no problem talking about reparations. I think a lot of Black folks are made to feel like we're asking for handouts or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's no, let's study the history of this stuff and why reparations have been made historically and why they were never made to the Black community. Because it was supposed to happen. It just never did. It just never did. White slave owners were given reparations for their quote unquote property that they lost. And yeah, I think that this has been long overdue. And whether or not it will ever happen, I don't know. But I think it's an egregious thing that's never happened.
Yeah. It's not even really a question of whether it should. It obviously should. Yeah. I agree with you. Paula Imaginis says, I live in Australia and have never been overseas, but want to travel to the USA one day. What I know of the USA, I learned from following people like you and watching TV. And thank you. I have learned so much about American politics from you. My question, are there any places in the USA where it would just not be safe for an LGBTQ woman to be a lone traveler? Is NYC, New York City, as dangerous as it appears on Law and Order SVU? That's really not a show you want to watch if you're thinking about coming to New York. It's good television, but it's not really a stamp of approval for the city.
Yeah. I don't watch Law and Order SVU.
I don't recommend that you do. You're planning on going back to New York anytime soon. But go ahead.
I do not watch. I do not typically watch crime procedurals because all they're probably going to do is have you looking over your shoulder a lot more than what you should. I mean, I've had these conversations before with people, particularly with people outside of the United States, questions around being LGBTQ in the wrong place. And I don't know, as a Black person, I guess that question strikes me differently than it would other people. And I think you may know what I'm saying, Van, here. It's, I think, and this varies from situation to situation. I certainly don't want to undermine the potential risk to someone who is LGBTQ, but we can't take off our Black skin. We don't have to announce to someone that we are Black. When I lived in Switzerland, okay, I spent a lot of time in Germany, a lot of time in Switzerland. I essentially lived in the Mediterranean for 3 straight months. I have spent a lot of time in Europe. And to walk around with Black skin in a place, especially when you get to some of the rural spots where people are not accustomed to seeing us, it changes your experience of that place. I studied German in college, majored in German studies in college, along with international business. And I went to Switzerland initially and lived there for a year to practice German, to learn German better. If I walked into a store and I intended to speak German with that shopkeeper, that really wasn't going to happen. They were immediately going to go into English. Maybe they were going to ask if I was Brazilian or something. Maybe. But they immediately would change their whole approach with me because of the color of my skin. And so I would say, as a Black person, that's a bit of a difficult question for me to answer in an unbiased way. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
Because because Blackness is not something that you could ever, under any circumstances, separate yourself from. Whereas if you were to walk into a shop as someone who is a part of the LGBTQ community, no one necessarily needs to know that. So the idea that I'm not safe here and I'm not safe there, are you asking about just being a tourist and kind of going and buying souvenirs and moving on to the next place? Or are you talking about establishing your home and setting up shop and being there with your partner? That's a different situation. Or if there are indicators and markers of exactly who you are. So that would be completely conditional. I'll say it like that. It would be completely conditional. It is not the same thing as being a person of color or being a Black person in a rural area in the United States or anywhere else in the world. But yeah, in certain parts of the United States, New York, any major metropolis, no, that's not an issue. Being gay in a place like New York, I would say absolutely not. That's not really a major issue that you would have to deal with. But once you leave any major city in the United States, you never know. You never know what you might deal with. And as Black folks, we know that. The minute you leave, you can think you're in the most progressive area of California, of New York, anywhere. But you might as well be down in deep South Alabama as soon as you leave major metropolis and maybe the outer suburbs of that metropolis. As soon as you get to a rural part of any state, yeah, you might have some issues.
Amen to that. Let's see. Winsome Grace asks, who is your dream feature artist?
Oh,
Wisdom. Did I say that right? Wisdom.
that's
Yeah,
my
Wisdom.
niece, I think. I saw
Okay.
that question come through.
Okay. Wisdom Grace. Yeah. She wants to know who's your dream feature artist.
The funny thing is that she actually asked me if I have a song called Miracle, and she heard it recently and she said she wanted to do a feature on that song. So I'm so excited. I've got to get the stems for her for that. I'm interested to hear what she is going to do with my song.
Okay. She's auditioning here is what I'm hearing. Okay.
I want to hear that. But in terms of my dream feature artist, I'm assuming she's speaking of a living person. I love Gregory Porter. He's probably my favorite living male singer. I got the chance to open for him. That'll always be like the feather in my cap. I got the chance to open for him all the way back in 2016 at the Tennessee Performing Arts Center. And so I would say just off the top of my head, I would probably have to say Gregory Porter.
Okay.
Other than legends like Stevie Wonder or Paul Simon or Billy Joel or someone like James Taylor, my God.
Oh.
Stevie Wonder, James Taylor, India Arie, Gregory Porter. I mean,
Yeah. The more you think about it, the list starts.
Exactly. Liz Wright. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah. Okay, so let's close with this. This will be our last question. Then if you want, we can do some rapid fire.
Yeah, we can do a rapid fire round. Yeah.
Fire. All right. Ashani Mfuko on TikTok asks, what unique challenges have you faced in the performing arts entertainment industry as a Black woman? That's one of the questions she wants to know. She also wants to know, where did you find the courage and confidence and strength to speak out about social justice?
Okay. Unique challenges as a Black woman, the same challenges I deal with every day as a Black woman. You're underestimated on a regular basis. You are assumed to not be writing your own music. You're assumed to not really know what you're doing from a production standpoint. A lot of the decisions that you want to make in terms of just, hey, what song do I want to put on this album? And how do I want this produced? What do I want the instrumentation to be? And is this too loud? And what kind of feel do I want on this? I mean, it's just, it's a constant battle, I would say, as a Black woman. And I've only ever been a Black woman, so I don't know how much of that opposition that other people deal with, people who are not Black women. I don't know, but I know that is the type of opposition that I deal with constantly. And what was the second part of the question? I'm so sorry.
She asked, how did you find the courage to speak up about social justice?
Yeah, that was an interesting progression because I don't talk a whole lot about my personal life a lot, but I will in telling this final story. My husband and I lived in Nashville I met him in Nashville, and he is a bassist, he's a musician, and we moved from Nashville after me being there for 13 years. He's from Nashville. But we moved away, and I knew that I wanted to move away long before I actually moved away. But it was, it took us a while to get away. But we finally moved away, and first to Newark, and then we ended up in Philly and during the pandemic. And it was like, what am I going to do? Performances have been shut down. The ability to perform and to do what I do, that is gone now. And I had always dabbled in making these little mini documentaries on friends of mine. I had a series called Music City Select, where I would take musician friends of mine and I would just create these little, maybe 3 to 8 minute pieces, these little featurettes on my musician friends. And I would just go grab them and I would interview them and create all this B-roll and just create little mini docs on them. Mm-hmm. And so I had some basic equipment. And so during the pandemic, I decided to upgrade. I had a conversation with my husband and said, okay, we need to upgrade some of this equipment. And then he got on board with it. I appreciated him for not questioning me too much about that. I'm like, I need to make some investments because stuff is about to change. We don't know how long the world is about to be shut down.
Yeah.
And I remember telling him at the time, I feel like there's an audience that is waiting to hear from me. They are waiting to hear what I have to say, but I don't quite know how to connect with them. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or say, but I feel that there are people who are waiting to hear from me. And I said, I don't know how to reach them, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure that out. And I was like, I'm a singer. And of course, 2020 was a year of major unrest, George Floyd, and we had the pandemic and Breonna Taylor and then all of the election stuff. And my God, the world was just exploding and I had so much to say. And I'm like, I don't want to have to wait 2 years to put out an album to speak to this moment. I feel like I'm supposed to talk right now. I feel like I'm supposed to make my voice heard. And so slowly but surely, first it was like little satirical bits and, I dipped my toe in the water. And then January 6th happened. And it was just like, after that, I was just a cauldron. I was just a bubbling cauldron. And I said, I can't worry about what people think I'm supposed to be saying as a singer. The people who are going to fall off, they're just going to have to fall off. And I've got to trust that the right people are going to come and replace them. And slowly but surely that process did happen. And yes, I received some inboxes from some folks going, I feel like you could really put things in just a more compassionate way. Let me tell you how to soften your message, because I feel like this is not really helpful. It's not really helpful what you're doing. I had those people rolling up in my inbox, and I still have them now. And these are people that I knew and that I felt like respected me or who liked my music. But I try to remind myself on a daily basis, really, that my job is to disappoint the right people. To disappoint the right people. Do not worry about the fact that you are disappointing people. Some people are supposed to be disappointed by you. And as someone who grew up as a woman, as a Black person, as a Christian, who was taught to be very, I'll use a biblical term, circumspect in how they conducted themselves in the world, who was taught to be very obedient, to be compliant. And those were the greatest virtues and values that you could present to the world. That was very hard for me. That was a very difficult shift to make, to decide to speak out and say, you know what, white folks, this is what you all need to understand about our history. This is what you're missing. This is why January 6th happened. This is why there's such a splinter between the Black church and the white church right now, or whatever the message that I was there to deliver. I had to really start to demand more of myself and stop worrying so much about wanting to be pleasing to everyone. And that is if you are raised to be a people pleaser, that's a very difficult process to go through. And I still wrestle with that from time to time, but I've just seen so much positive come from this. I'm doing this radio show now because I was willing to push past that assumption and that training and that deep coding within myself that said, no, we're the polite kind of Black people. We're the well-behaved ones. All that respectability politics that I grew up with, pushing past all of that has opened up so many opportunities for me since then. My life is 180 degrees different than it was 5 years ago. So I've dealt with my challenges, but I would say all in all that going through that process is well worth it. And I'd say particularly for women, I know men deal with that too, but particularly for women, that journey is worthwhile.
All right, let's get into a couple of rapid fire questions and see what you have for us. What is the last movie that made you cry?
Oh, goodness. I can't even answer that question. I will tell you a movie that always makes me cry, and it's an old movie called Brubaker from 1976, starring Robert Redford. Don't look at me like that, Van.
I've never heard of it.
Nobody has. It's a movie from 1976 called Brubaker. And if you see it, you'll probably wonder what in the world that I am crying at. But it gets me. There's a scene at the end where that Robert Redford he's a reformer in a prison system, and then he does everything he can do. And at the end, he has to walk away from it. And everyone there in the prison yard gives him a standing ovation as he's leaving. And it just breaks me up every time. Oh my God. And I haven't seen Brubaker in years, but yeah, Robert Redford's one of my favorite actors. And that scene gets me every time. So yeah, I'll say Brubaker.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check Brubaker out. I need to see this. It
I need to
sounds
see it
interesting.
too.
What's your favorite place to visit?
Switzerland, Interlaken, Switzerland, and I hope to visit there again next year.
Well, what is it about Switzerland?
Oh, I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's the place that I lived for a year after I graduated college, thinking I was going to learn the German language better, but not realizing that they speak a completely different form. I say they speak German on crack. It is a completely different form of German. It's Schweizerdeutsch. It's Swiss German. But that place it became near and dear to me. And I was an au pair there. So I took care of children when I was there. And one of the little girls that I took care of she's recently made contact with me again. And for some reason, she just had a baby and she has really wanted to involve me in just what she's doing right now. And it just means everything to me. So I'm so looking forward to being able to get back there to Interlaken and experience that place in a way that I was not able to when I was a poor, broke college student.
What's one of the best gifts you've ever received?
Oh, goodness. I'm so terrible with these types of questions. My sister gave me a ticket to the James Taylor concert not too long after I graduated college. And I remember that and James Taylor is one of my absolute favorite artists in the world. And she spent $50 on that ticket. And it's crazy now with all the price inflation with Live Nation and Ticketmaster and stuff. We're going through a kind of a hellish experience with some Stevie Wonder tickets that someone just stole from us. They transferred them. A hacker just transferred tickets to themselves. But ticket prices right now and the way that ticket sales work right now is so different than it used to be. But at that time, paying $50 for a ticket, this is back, 20 years ago, it was a big deal. And it just touched my heart. I just could not believe that she would take the time and spend the money to do that, because I knew that was a big deal for her. So yeah, I'd say that was one of the more meaningful gifts that I've received.
Okay. This is an interesting question, I would think, to ask you, especially with your nostalgic bent. Who was your first celebrity crush?
Robert Redford.
Oh, Brubaker.
Yes.
It's all adding up now. It's all adding up now.
Oh, you're a quick one, Van. You're sharp as a tack.
Hey, this ain't my first rodeo. As he saunters out of the prison, everyone stands to applaud him. Sweat trickling down his furrowed brow. Crystal blue eyes staring into the camera.
I believe you're shaming me, man.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
Little 11-year-old. Our parents took us on a little mini vacation. We lived in Detroit at the time, and our parents took us on a little mini vacation. That's what our father would do. Sometimes he would just take us to a hotel, and we would just stay for a couple of days. And I think it was the movie channel at the time had an all-day festival of Robert Redford movies on. And I was mesmerized. I was glued to the screen, and I just could not stop watching Robert Redford movies. Yeah. Robert Redford was the one. I also liked Robert from The Cosby Show.
Oh, Robert. Yeah,
Robert.
Yeah.
And that's
it's always interesting. It's always interesting when I've asked other people that question about their childhood crushes. When you're a small kid and you have a crush on some celebrity, you always wonder what makes a person gravitate toward whoever it is they gravitate for. I just always find it interesting that we have those things. It's one thing when you're going through puberty, you have all kind of crushes then, but when you're a kid, like I was, I had a thing for Donna Summer when I was a little kid. I was crazy about Donna Summer.
She's
the
great.
most beautiful woman in the world. Now, as I got older, I realized I was right, but I was on to something. Yeah. What's one thing you would tell your childhood self?
Oh, goodness gracious. That's almost a depressing question. So what age am I talking to me?
I don't want to say 11 because I don't want to break you from your Robert Redford fixation. You're apparently way too busy at the moment at that age. So let's just say 7. 7-year-old. What would you tell 7-year-old Dara?
Man, I don't know that I'd have a whole lot to tell 7-year-old Dara. Listen to your instincts. I think with that religious programming, I don't even know if 7-year-old me would have the ability to internalize or grasp this message. But with a lot of that religious programming, the messaging that you're given. I am not my own. My life is not my own. You are to follow the leading and guiding of the Holy Spirit. A lot of it, and I think it's maybe a little bit unintentional on the part of a lot of our teachers and leaders and things, but a lot of it, the messaging we get when we're little kids in those fundamentalist type environments is you can't trust yourself. You are not the best authority on whatever it is. And I think my whole life has been a process of unlearning that messaging, that you are a safe place. You are a safe place. You are your best protector. You can trust yourself. You are not evil. You are God's creation. He made you something that is good and to show, as the Bible says, should show forth his praises. That means that the voice that you hear inside of you is coming from God. If God is in you, then you can trust your voice because that is the voice of God. So I don't know that little 7-year-old me would appreciate all that, but I would try to curtail a little bit of that programming that says you always have to be looking outward to find the answer. Somebody else always knows better than you. I would try to center myself and really teach myself to learn how to trust my own voice a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
And then 7-year-old me would be like, what are you talking about? I just want to play with my Barbies. Mommy, there's a strange lady bothering me.
If nothing else, it would definitely be a memorable moment for the 7-year-old you. You would never forget the encounter, if nothing else.
I hope so.
All right. We're going to give you one last question. This is one that is politically divisive because the country has been split down the middle on this for quite some time.
Oh.
Drums or flats?
Oh, my God. Flats, absolutely. Although I have been pulled over a little bit to the side of drums. There is a place in Philadelphia called OG Wings. If you have the chance to visit Philadelphia, visit OG Wings. They have the best wings I have ever had. And I was mad for a while that they wouldn't let me on the DoorDash. They wouldn't let me special order flats only. But I started learning how to appreciate drums because of OG Wings. So if you're in Philly, try OG Wings, garlic parmesan. But I do prefer the flats, I got to say.
So garlic parmesan is the flavor you're going with, huh?
Garlic parmesan flats.
Okay. All right. You have spoken. I think that tells us everything we need to know about you.
Does it?
Well, some people are really big in wings. I'm somebody who, personally, I think the whole wing division thing is terrible. I want a whole wing. I feel like I'm being cheated.
That's true. That's one thing I appreciate about Chinese restaurants is they know how to cook some wings and they will give you the full wing. A wing is a wing.
Yeah. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Dara Star Tucker. And was this as excruciating as you thought it was going to be?
Yes. Yes, it was. Because I assume the last thing people want to know about is me. I just, as someone who has to talk a lot, I just assume that people are as tired of hearing my voice and my opinion as I am. But I appreciate those of you who wrote in and who actually tuned in for this and were somewhat entertained by it. Van tells me this is something that people actually might want to listen to. So I'm trusting you on this, Van, that we're not going to see our ratings tank because she was just on there yakking about herself. Now I'm going to tune in next week when she talking about something.
All right. Y'all heard that. My well-being is on the line here and my fate is in your hands. Do what you can.
No, I appreciate you, Van. Thank you for encouraging me to put myself out there a little bit. It's something I really want to do more of. So thank you.
I think it'll go well. Would you like to close us out?
Sure, absolutely. This has been the Ask Me Anything edition of The Breakdown. And I want to thank you all so much for joining me here on KJLH. You know where to find me, Dara Tucker B on Instagram. Everywhere else, I am Dara Star Tucker. That's Dara with one R and Star with two. You can also find me at Radio Free KJLH on Instagram. And we can continue these conversations. If you have other questions you're curious about, my DMs are always open. I want to thank Mr. Van Everett for joining us. Where can people find you, Van?
You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram. Let's just go with Instagram. Van Everett. If you type that in, that should bring me up. And you can find
Van with a V, like a van that you drive.
Van, V as in vegetable. I have a whole lifetime of people not getting my name correct. I don't even want to get into. V as in vegetable, A-N Everett, Everette. And you can also find, if you want to find out more from me, you can probably find more on the Scenario page as well, which you can go to www.thescenarioradioshow.com and find everything Van Everett there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Van, for being my partner in crime for this particular episode. And we've got 4 weeks until the election, folks. We are in the final push. Nobody's happier about that than I am. I'm absolutely honored to be doing the work that I'm doing, but I am really looking forward to us being able to push this boulder over the hill, as I like to say. So if you are not registered to vote, we're getting down to the wire with that. You can visit vote.org/Dara. Be sure to check your voter registration because, as we know, voter rolls are being purged constantly. There's some dastardly deeds going on right now. Yeah. So check your voter rolls. I would say weekly. Check and make sure that you are still there. And then remember to early vote if possible. If your state has mail-in voting, mail-in vote or walk in and early vote, whatever you have to do just to take off the pressure. And let's make sure and do our part to create a decisive win against the forces that would try to attack our democracy. And there's nothing less than that's at stake this year. So let's not forget that we all have our part to play. And again, as I said to the lady at the beginning, I think it was Donna Valentine that asked, if you're nervous and you're on edge and you're not sure what to do, sounding off online is not necessarily going to accomplish anything. Call up your local DNC and get active, get to working, get to doing something, put your hand to the plow. And we are going to make this happen, y'all, just 4 more weeks. So thank you so much for joining me here on The Breakdown. I will see you at the same time and the same place next week. And until then, let's learn to shout.